Remasters, remakes and all the things brand new, they do get confusing sometimes, but Medieval certainly falls within the remaster. This is not a remake at all. In fact, looking at this early demo which is up on the PSN store for both your PS4 and your PS4 Pro, it's a very early taste of the game and the first level of the title. You can clearly see the team has paid much love and care and attention to the original Medieval title back on the PS1, a huge game that was a huge title and actually one that spurred one of the many early teams that moved into Sony Worldwide Studios, not that it was known that back then, in their internal studio development. Released in 1998 on the PS1, it is a title that holds a special place in many people's hearts, mine included. And you can expect something a little more detailed around Halloween time to look forward to. But here, looking at the PS1 original and the new PS4 version here, the obvious improvements are quite stark. Resolution, details, textures, and that camera system, which was a big point of the title back in the day. It's more than just a spit and polish, but it certainly is a spit and polish. It's kept itself true to the origins of the original team and its aesthetic. That Tim Burton feel is evident throughout, from the intro sequence, which is almost a carbon copy with little embellishments here and there, but sometimes shot for shot it's bang on, and then other times it's slightly different. The level layout, the design, the controls, and the camera system have all been improved ever so slightly, but they still feel true and almost perfectly as they've described themselves. In fact, a reimagining of how you thought the game played now. When you go back, it doesn't quite play the same. They've really captured that feel and design perfectly throughout. They have made some slight changes here and there with some of the character layouts, the enemies, the objects, and how you pick things up, and the control system, easily flicking between weapons now rather than pressing select and choosing from that little sub menu you got on the original PS1. Ultimately, I think even the most hardened fan, of which I class myself in that, won't be offended by how close they've kept it to that original art style. And again, the Tim Burton Nightmare Before Christmas theme that the whole game was going for, which was very prevalent back in the mid to late 90s. This game was heavily influenced by that style, and again the Danny Elfman soundtrack. It sounds beautiful and it sounds as good as ever. This has not really ruined that feel at all, and it's got that gothic Halloween feel perfectly down pat. So I'm sure when you pick this up come launch in October, you won't be saddened to feel that it has captured the very essence of that original title, even down to that clunky movement and feel, which was always part of the title anyway. You just don't get that horrible texture warping that the PS1 was famous for, which I've covered on multiple retro videos. Drifting away from the comparisons of the original PS1, which really is kind of a no-brainer. This isn't really anything clever here showing you. You can see the fact that the close-up over-the-shoulder camera is still there, but now you can move around freely in this mode and attack, which does help the combat, whereas on the PS1 original you could only stand still and admire the beauty. Overall though, the visual aesthetic, the improvements, the volumetric lighting, the lighting overall and the colour tones have all been enhanced and give more of a Spyro type colour tone feel than the original dark version, and that is probably the biggest change you'll see throughout. They've used depth, atmospheric scattering, that fog effect in the background and the distance, much more here, which obviously is a benefit of these newer systems, and it really does feel like a Disney version of what you would expect, or at least a Pixar version of the Nightmare Before Christmas moved into medieval style. Moving away from the game though on the PS1 and into the actual games on the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, how do they differ? Well, you may be surprised to know that both versions render identically at 1920 by 1080. That isn't a huge amount of numbers on a retro game, many may say, but this isn't a retro game, this is a modern game based on an old game, so don't confuse the two. There's a lot more going on here per frame than there was on the original title. But it's not as bad as it may sound, because performance is the biggest improvement. Moving away from the 30 FPS original, we now see both versions targeting 60 FPS. But it doesn't hit them all the time. In fact, performance on this demo version can be quite poor, and one is much worse than the other. No surprise to know that that's the base PS4. Looking at the performance here, as you can see on screen, I would say personally I would target the PS4 version at 30 and drop any aims of keeping this at 60 FPS. Now there may be huge improvements to come. Again, I must stress this, I do all the time. Many demo versions like this are quite old builds because they're far more stable, they've been tested and they're isolated, so they won't crash, bug out or cause any kind of concern for the final game. So this may be 6 months old, it may be 6 days old, I don't know. I'm saying somewhere in between those two numbers, so the final game that's out in a month's time may be significantly improved from here. There are some hints every now and then of some of the issues with the title that point towards the fact that it does need a little bit more polish to come on. So we'll have to wait and see what the final game, and you can be sure that I will be covering that. But in terms of performance, the PS4 Pro is probably around 50% better at certain points in the title. It's not a locked 60, but it does perform much better. So I think with a little bit of tweaking, it certainly suffers more in the heavy alpha moments when you're zoomed in up close behind the camera, you're attacking enemies, and the particle effects and the alpha effects fill the screen. Again, quick wins there by cutting down the resolution here on the alpha buffers would be a much easier win. You see this in the game with the volumetric light is very low resolution, which is obvious on both versions. There doesn't appear to be any visual difference at all between the two versions, right down to that resolution I've just mentioned. But of course they're not misusing that extra hardware levels in the Pro, they're using it to push the performance and the frame rate up rather than the visual quality. That's not to say they won't add that option in a final release though. A 4K 30 mode or 1440p 30 mode might still be an option. But they are pushing the performance on the Pro much better, and in fact, in these tested sections here, the PS4 never hits 60, with a high point of 50 FPS. Maybe suspicious that it's a PAL version, but it isn't a PAL version. This is definitely a fully native 60 FPS or 60 Hz version, so no fears there. And the PS4 Pro does pull much closer to that 60 FPS more often than the base PS4. Whether or not they improve the game significantly to push that visual quality up, or at least the performance quality up over and above what we're seeing at the moment, we'll have to wait and see. But at the moment I am happy with how they've delivered the demo. It's very short, even though it has got a short timed version. It will be off the store by the beginning of October, I believe. So if you want to download it quickly. It's very short, it's just the first level, which is always a short level in the game anyway. It was just an opener to tease you into the rest of the game. So do download it, give it a try, but don't expect high quality performance. The presentation levels from Other Ocean, the developers of this remaster, are very good. They've certainly captured the original feel like I've mentioned. It does have a mixture of real-time and pre-rendered cinematics, as you can see on screen. The pre-rendered cinematics do ramp up the visual quality, the texture quality, and obviously the motion blur and things like that, but they are sacrificed to 30 FPS rather than 60, and you can see some of that macro blocking and artifacting from the video files, but it's an obvious sacrifice for a title that's not going to have millions and millions spent on its development cycle. You won't be disappointed in what they've managed to capture, and I'm actually thirsty for far more of this. I just can't wait to pumpkin season till I can take a slice of this medieval pie. Anyway, that's it. It's a short one, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe and share where appropriate, and all the other good things that you hear and on every other channel under the sun. I'm out, but always learn that lesson from Dead Man Dan well. Always be careful when fighting the undead hordes at rushing face forward, as it can be far more than simple mud in your eye. I'll catch you on the next one.